It was a perfectly calm, serene place, perfect for a cup of tea with a crumpet. And the Frenchman says, what are you talking about? The Garden of Eden was a very romantic place. Adam and Eve fall in love, they get married, very romantic. And the Russian says, you're all foolish dreamers. It was awful. There was no shelter. They had no clothes. And all they had to eat was an apple, he says. So whether you find this humorous or not, we look at the Torah portion, we look at life based on how we see ourselves. That's how we evaluate things. But the truth is, or maybe not truth, the insight is that why are we studying the Torah portion? Why are we studying Torah at all? Is because we want to take out from God's brilliance and wisdom and the wisdom of the universe insights into our lives, perspectives, how to approach things, how to look at ourselves, how to find happiness, love, joy, spiritual wealth, and so on. So the Torah, as the Zohar says, is the blueprint of the universe. And I'm going to start with a quote from the Zohar, Istakla baraisa bar alma. God looked into the Torah and created the world. And why is this such an important statement from Zohar? Zohar, by the way, is the secrets and the esoteric of the Torah. Kabbalah is based on Zohar. Is because you would say God created the world, then God wrote the Torah and said, here's how to deal with the world. Here's your Mac manual on how to use your MacBook. But the opposite, God wrote the architectural plan and then created the world based on the architectural plan, which means to say that if it's not in the plan, it's not in the Torah, it's not in the world. And why this is so important to know is that no matter what happens for all generations, it's in the Torah. Vaccines, solutions, halachic analysis, for example, very quickly, in vitro fertilization. What are you permitted to do halachically? It's in the Torah. The rabbinic authorities know how to use the Torah to bring forth rulings on halacha, Jewish law, for all the situations, euthanasia, abortions, fertilizations, medical emergencies, anything and anything that comes into the universe can be found in the Torah. So Torah is God's wisdom and the blueprint of the universe. And when God dictated the Torah to Moses, it took him 40 years to write the Torah scrolls. He wrote 13 scrolls, gave one to each of the tribes to keep, and one was put into the ark. And again, why is this important to know that no matter which place you go to and open up a Torah scroll that's written properly, parchment, by a Jewish scribe and so on, it's going to be identical to any other Torah in the world. So 13 copies so that if, God forbid, one was lost, one got destroyed, one had a mistake, they could always go back to the one on the ark and check. Did we make a mistake when we copied it? Is there an error in this Torah? So wherever you go, the Torah scroll does not change. The words of God, the wisdom of God does never changes. This is the Genesis. This is what the Torah is. Torah comes from the word also hara, to teach. It's a history book. It's a book of life. It's a book of God's wisdom. There's so many things in the Torah. There it says, Yeshev apanim la Torah. The Torah has 7 faces. You can look at it from so many different angles and perspectives. Again, law, history, the ideology, philosophy, storytelling, everything and anything is found in the Torah. One more little point before we start is that the written tradition, the 5 books of the Torah, that we read every week in the synagogue. We read a different Torah portion, and each Torah portion is divided in sections called aliyot. You know, people get called up for every section, are without vowels. If you look at a Torah scroll, there's no vowels. The Torah reader has to learn which word he's reading, because many Hebrew words sound the same but mean different things. Lo and lo. Lo means him. Lo also means no. Or L and L, spelled the same, but one means two, one means four. So that's why many times when the Torah reader is reading, you'll see there's a fellow on the side of him who corrects him, and he'll repeat the word. So it's read properly. So just to clarify, every week we read the Torah portion, and we finish it Simchat Torah, and we begin again this Shabbat. So it's really a good time to start our Torah study circle. The beginning of time, the beginning of life. So
wait, you said, hold on, you said low and low? Like low, I know is no, but low is what?
To him.
To him?
To him.
How do you spell that?
Lamed Vav. Lamed Vav.
Okay, fine. I never knew that.
You have a Hebrew word that means two things, or L and L. One means one, two, T-O, and one means on.
Well, also the guy, he also corrects it because God's name is perfect. So everything that's said has to be perfect, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yes.
So before I want to go into the story of creation, which is really very fascinating, and to life's lessons, I want to just clarify a little bit some interesting insights which are very relevant to us and how God went about creating the world. So the Kabbalah, for this we need Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. It says, "B'asara maimarais nivra ha'olam." God spoke 10 words and created the world. What were these 10 words? Anybody know? Bibbidi bobbidi boom from Cinderella. What does Harry Potter say? The 10 maimaros, the 10 utterances, are the 10 sephirot, the 10 emanations of God. So there are 10 emanations, 10 characteristics of the universe, of God. We refer to them many times. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, for example, kindness, severity, beauty, the emotional attributes. We won't go into them right now, but God uttered the 10 words, the 10 emanations, the 10 sephirot, and everything came into being with these 10 utterances. What else do we have 10 in the world? 10 utterances, 10 emanations, 10. Anybody?
10 commandments.
What else are 10? I'm looking at my.
Are there 10 matriarchs and patriarchs? Like, is that a total of 10?
7.
No, it's 7. Okay, so
7. So this 10, the numerical.
The 10 minion. The minion has to be 10.
10, very good, because of the spies, the 10 spies who rebelled. So 10 is the DNA of the universe, the number 10, the 10 commandments, which is the foundation of law and order in our world. The 10 utterances, the 10 characteristics of God. The whole world is centered on these 10. So God said 10 words, the 10 emanations, the 10 spheres, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus, and the thing came into being. And so on and so forth until the whole creation came into being. And it was Yesh Me'ayin. God created the world from nothing. So it's not like God had materials. You want to build a table, you have wood, you have glue, you have a hammer, you have a nail. God created, the Kabbalah says, everything from nothing. Why is this also interesting to know? Because the Torah tells us that God recreates the world every millisecond. And were God, so to speak, to take a step away from the world and say, look, I need a vacation from this, the world would return to nothingness. Because the world was built on nothingness. So therefore, if God doesn't recreate every single second of time, the world would resort to its original non-form or non-entity. So that we have to say every day, thank you, God, for recreating us every day. Otherwise, it's almost like a cartoon, you know, where the ghost disappears and all you see is nothing. It disappears. Same concept. God created the world from nothing. And another very interesting insight I love to share is that the Kabbalah, and then we'll go to a little bit more practical, the Kabbalah says something that in order to create the world, God had to condense God's self, which means like this, that God's light is so overpowering, so omnipresent, that if God did not condense himself or herself and compact that light, the world couldn't exist. Think of the blinding sun. If you look at the sun, you have to close your eyes. You can't really look directly at the sun. You have to keep your eyes closed or you squint. So if God would not have condensed the power, the light of God, and like put it in a box, so to speak, you couldn't exist because the light would obliterate everything. Godliness would obliterate anything in its path. So it's called Tzimtzum. God took God's light, condensed it, smashed it, put it to the side, and then the world was able to exist because God removed God's self from the world in a sense. God's huge light, overbearing light. And our job, our purpose, our mission in the world is to keep taking more and more of that light and bringing it back to the world till we can really look at the sun, till we can hold that great light in the palm of our hand without being burnt alive or overpowered by the light. And that, in a nutshell, is the mission and purpose of humanity, to keep bringing more of God's light into the world, the light that's pushed away and hidden because we cannot accept it at this time. We're not ready for it. We slowly bring more and more of it into the world by doing acts of goodness, kindness, mitzvahs, and so on. So is that clear? Because it is a lofty concept. One more analogy so it's clear is think of it, you have a very, very hot cup of tea and you put it into a teeny, teeny, tiny thimble, glass thimble. The thimble will shatter. The thimble cannot handle the hot water of the tea. So what do? You slowly pour the water in, the hot water, so the glass doesn't shatter. And that's the light of God. It's so big, it's so hot, you can't just pluck it and pour it into a mug. You have to slowly pour it in until the mug can accept that heat, that cup of tea. Until the world can really accept God's whole light, we slowly, little light at a time. And also one more beautiful analogy of this is relationships. Sometimes a man or a woman, they go into a relationship, or a teacher and a student, a parent and a child, where you are overpowering. The other person does not allow to speak. The other person is not allowed to express themselves. The other person doesn't have a say. It's your way or the highway. Nope, I have to be the one. The teacher, this is my way, it's the only way. The parent, no, this is the way I said the discipline. In the relationship, no, this is what I want and this is what's going to happen. Tzimtzum in a relationship means that you make room for another person in your life. You allow them to express themselves. You allow their approach. You allow them to be heard. You allow their opinion. You allow them to flourish in the relationship. It's not only about you. It's not only about what the teacher says, it's about what the student feels or needs. It's not only about what the wife needs or the husband needs, it's about what each one needs. And the parent and the child, you allow your child's ways, talents, emerge, even though that's not what you, let's say, wanted for your child or felt they needed. So God is in essence teaching us the secret to a healthy relationship. If God can remove God's power to the side to allow us to exist in the world and creation to exist, so too in our relationships. We have to allow our partners, our children, our students, our friends to also have a say, have a part, have a opinion. We cannot swallow everyone up in our path because we're strong-willed, or we know best, or we're smarter, we're more powerful. I know what I need, and that's the way it's going to be. So God's tzimtzum is a lesson in life's relationships. You have to make room. It doesn't mean you don't have a say. It means you make room for the other person as well. It makes sure you can have an interest, he can have an interest, and then you have the combined interest of being in a relationship with someone else and making room for the other person, whether it's child, spouse, student, and friend. So tzimtzum is really the secret or the recipe for success in relationships. There was a person who wrote to the Rebbe and said, you know, everyone always steps on me. They have no respect for me. Wherever I go, I'm being stepped on. So the Rebbe responded, says, you know, maybe you're spreading yourself out in too many places, so everyone steps on you. Maybe you should confine yourself to one place sometimes. So sometimes you're spread out all over the place. So of course everyone is stepping on you because there's no room for them to walk. So the analogy is you have to be able to make room for someone else in your life. And then you can both flourish. You can both shine and sparkle. That's the concept of tzimtzum. God stepped aside to make a world, and sometimes we have to step aside to make room for the other. The he and the she becomes the we. That's the secret to healthy, happy relationships based on creation. Let's take a quick sip of water. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, clear? Any clarification needed? It is a lofty idea, but I always feel it's important to share this because you wonder, how did God go about making a world? Now I want to ask you a question. Why did God create a world? What did God need us for? Tell me. We deny God. We rebel against God. Some of us don't believe in a God. We think we know better than God. We want to control God. We want to control the world. Why did God need us? What do you think? Why did God create a world? You know, sometimes you say it was more trouble than it's worth. Why did I do it? So sometimes don't you wonder from God's perspective, God, what did you need us for? Trust me. What did you get out of this? Kim, you have any suggestions? Khani, good morning. Carrie, you have anything you want to say?
To carry out his name and to do the things that the chesed that he can't, I mean, just to carry out his name so he can live forever. I mean, he does live forever even without people, but I don't know. That's a good question. Why does he need us? But he does.
I have a few thoughts, but I want to hear what you think. And it's supposed to be conversation. I don't want to dominate the conversation. Carrie, what do you think?
I think that he's needing us because he's there spiritually, maybe not in a body form, so that we as body forms can then maybe go out and do things that are the right things to do.
Good, very good. It's like why the soul needs the body, because the soul can't float around on its own. Khani, you want to add anything? Well, Khani, you have a beautiful picture there. Wow. I have to use your picture when I teach. Not to put you on the spot. It's
Yeah,
kind
no,
of.
I'm just like thinking, I like what everyone else said. I want to hear what your answer is.
There's many answers. One of them is Kabbalistic. God told us in the Torah, God said, I created the world. I wanted it. I wanted a world. That's the Kabbalistic line. But more so, I build on Kim, I'm going to build on your point. Ein melech lo yam. You can't have a king without a nation. What kind of a king is there if there's no nation? Oh, who are you the king of? The king of the universe, the king of the thorns. They have always these jokes about kings. Who are you ruling over? You don't even have anybody. So a king needs a nation. A king needs people to rule, in a sense, not rule in a negative way, but ein melech b'lo am. God's greatest joy and happiness, and I mentioned this so many times in the class because it's so important to know, is seeing his people, his men, his women, his creations, who are imperfect, limited, challenged, go out and say in the morning, Moda ani lefanecha, thank you, God, for putting me in this world. Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, God is one. The greatest joy and happiness is when us, the imperfect, or let me say me, many of you are perfect, men and women, I cannot go and seek out God.
What?
At Torah. Good morning, Margaret. Seek out mitzvahs, seek out goodness and kindness when it's so easy for us to just sit in our homes, be selfish, be self-centered, and care only about ourselves. God gave us challenges, gave us desires, sometimes unhealthy desires. And yet we choose God, we choose goodness, we choose kindness, we choose mitzvahs, we choose God, and we choose to find God and seek God in our lives. God says, what greater gift is this than a limited, imperfect world looks for me, looks for light. So this is just one. There's so many interesting insights, but I don't want to only talk about this. But this is what the Torah tells us. God's greatest joy is our imperfection, our brokenness.
Okay.
And what gives God the greatest joy.
Hi. Did you sleep late too?
And we try to put it together.
I know.
This is what God wants from us. I many times said that God is not looking for perfection. God wanted perfection. God has the angels who can only do the will of God. God created us imperfect so that when we do one act of perfection, it's the greatest gift that we can give Almighty God and bring wholeness and light to this world. Because again, if God didn't want imperfect people, couldn't we have been made all the same, all perfect, all beautiful, all one way, all the same talents, the same characteristics, the same kind-heartedness? Why did God have to make people different ways and give them different challenges? Because God, this is what God wants from us. Like Jung, one of the philosophers, writes that transcendence, we all seek perfection, but it's an unattainable goal. Exactly. It's unattainable. There's always more to learn, more to do, more to be. This is what God wants from us.
Right. And also, can I add that?
Please.
The reason we're not all created exactly like the same with the same strengths, talents, and whatever's, is that because we're all supposed to contribute to society and be there for each other. Perfection isn't attainable for one person. It's like teamwork.
Exactly. It's the yin and the yang. And this is actually a very good segue into talking now about the first man and woman in the world. But before that, I want to talk to you. I want to go over the days of creation so we have perspective of what happened. So let's quickly go through all the 6 days of creation. And then I want to share with you something that first time I ever read this, by the way, and I think I've been studying Bereshith for years, and I'm going to call it the great cover-up. Okay, the great cover-up of Bereshith. But first, let's go through the 6 days of creation. Okay, so day 1, anybody know day 1? Darkness and light. Okay?
Light and darkness.
Light and
Yes.
darkness. Interesting, but you know what? I'm reading from a transliteration and it says darkness and light. Interesting. So maybe there was darkness first, that's why. On the 2nd day, God makes the heavens and he divides the upper heavens from the lower, you know? Okay, separation. On the 3rd day, land and sea and trees, greenery, flowers. The 4th day, the sun, the moon, and the stars. And the fish, the birds, and the reptiles on the 5th day. The 6th day, the most famous day, you and me, man and woman are created. And the 7th day, you could look at it as a creation, the day of Shabbos, the day of rest. 7 days of creation. Beautiful, beautiful creation. So when you read the story in the Torah, doesn't it sound beautiful? The world emerges slowly but surely. It's gorgeous. I could just see it happening. You know, like those, did you ever see the opening scene of Game of Thrones? The buildings start popping up, right? You're sitting there, you're watching this unfold. And one of my students in Hebrew school asked such a beautiful question yesterday, I overheard. She said, why didn't God first create the man and the woman and then the world? So what do you think the answer is? Because God wanted to give them a ready-made world, something to come into. So when you invite guests, you set the table, you cook the food. You don't sit them on the couch and say, wait, dinner will be ready in 2 hours. In a few days, God prepared the world for humanity and then brought them into the world. So this is the great cover-up. When you read the story of Bereshith, it's very fascinating, beautiful. Wow, wow, everything is so perfect. But when you start studying the inside story, the commentaries, the Torah reveals that there were many glitches in creation. Many things happened that we don't even know about. And I want to share some of those glitches and explain what's going on here. So let's start from the beginning. So God creates light, right? The first day, light. But what happens, as we discussed before, God realizes that if God puts God's light into the world cannot contain the light. Nothing else can exist if it's only God's light. So God realizes he made a mistake. I got to move the light over. I got to condense the light. So day 1 already, there's a glitch. The light has to be condensed. It's not working. Okay. Now day 2. Day 2. God made the heaven and the earth. He put the waters of the heaven up into the heavens because, you know, heaven contains waters. That's how we have rain and so on. And then there's waters down on earth. But what happens? If you read the Medrash, the lower waters complain. God, that's not fair. How come those waters get to be up in the heaven and I get to be down here? I want to be up in the heaven. Already there's a complaint. The waters of earth don't want to be down below. They want to be up above. Okay. Second problem. Third problem. Okay. The 3rd day, God created the trees. And you know that God created that the branches and the bark of the trees should be edible and taste like the fruit of the tree. But the trees said no. Only our fruit is going to have the taste. And they rebelled. They did not allow their branches and their bark to have the taste of the fruit. Okay? commentaries tell us this. Now the fourth day, the sun, the moon, and the stars are created. And if you remember the famous story, the moon comes to God and says, I and the sun are the same size. We can't have two rulers in the constellations. It's one or the other. Either the sun rules or I rule. Can't have two rulers. God says, oh, you can't have two rulers. Okay, I'm going to make you the smaller one. So now the moon is the one that waxes and wanes. It never stays a full moon. It waxes and it wanes. It spoke up. It didn't have humility. It refused to share the kingdom with the sun. God said, okay, I'm going to make you smaller. No problem. Okay? We're almost done with the problems. And on Thursday, God created the fish, and there was this giant fish called the Leviathan. A fish so large that were it to procreate, there would be no room for other fish in the ocean. So God took away the second species of the Leviathan and left one so that it could not multiply. Otherwise, the whole ocean would only be this one fish, which the Torah tells us when Mashiach comes, we're going to have this special fish as a feast for the entire nation. Interesting tidbit. And then lastly, comes the sixth day of creation. God creates man and woman, Adam and Chava. And what is the first thing? He says, don't eat from the tree of knowledge. Boom, they eat from the tree of knowledge. So the commentaries are showing us behind the scenes, even creation had its glitches, had its problems, had its hurdles, and God had to struggle with creation a little bit. And then to top it all off, look what God says at the end of creation. I want to read it to you. Vayar Elokim es kol asher asa, v'hinei tov ma'od. And God saw everything God created, and said, it's excellent, it's very good. Really? Every day was a problem and it's very good? Why did God say it's very good? It's not so good. Look at all the headaches God had. So there's a beautiful insight that I want to share from this. Based also on the fact that everything God does is to teach us about life, about our approach to life, about how we should look at our lives. It seems sometimes that everything is rosy and perfect, and then there's glitches, there's bumps, there's hurdles, there's challenges. But the reason in the regular text it's not mentioned all these hurdles is because God is telling us something. That you have a story, you have a journey, and your story, your journey will have bumps, will have challenges, will have hurdles, will have problems, will have issues that come up. But do not allow these bumps in your life to define your story, your journey, your life. Your 6 days of creation, so to speak. So that's why when the Torah is written, God shows us the 6 days of creation very beautifully, very simply, until we study what really went on, to show us, do not let your life story be defined by these challenges in your life. You will have challenges, you will have bumps, you will have unexpected things that happen, that mar your life, that make it difficult, that make you cry out and say, why me? Couldn't be simple, couldn't be easy. Yet, let that not define your life. Let your life be defined by the good, happy, beautiful, smooth moments in your life. And that's why there are glitches. So God is telling us, let your story remain pure and beautiful. Don't let that mar your life, make you bitter, angry, upset, miserable. Because even God, in the 6 days of creation, there was a glitch here, there was a glitch there. And yet, the world came into being, and look how beautiful the world came into being. The great cover-up, we call it. Creation cover-up. I read this, I never heard this before. I also, every time I study Genesis, wow, this is amazing. Everything is so perfect. So God shares that no, things are not always so perfect, even in God's world. Does anybody have any comments, questions, insights?
No, but that was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. So now the highlight of creation. God creates Adam and Chava, man and woman, male and female. And the Kabbalah says, and Rashi comments, that did you know that originally there was only one person created? One person who was both male and female, anatomy and characteristics.
Wow.
Then, so if anybody tells you women were created second, they weren't. It was one person created, one human being. Then God puts the person to sleep, and from the side, not the rib, that's a misconception, from the side of the person, God creates a male and a female, an Adam and a Chava. Adam, the man, Chava, the woman. And
What do you mean by the side? What do you mean?
The person's side, here.
Like the hip? Oh.
From the side. Now, why the side? So that no one would say, they're not equal. One came from the rib, one came from the knee. There's one that's superior to the other. So the side means even, side by side.
Can I add something? Somebody once told me that a woman has manliness and a man has woman in it. So we're both mixed, whether one's dominated or not. Like a woman could be a little bit like a man.
Yes.
Meaning, like someone said that I have manly qualities. And I said, I understand. Like I'm very driven. Like, so there's a mix, and there's some men with feminine qualities. That doesn't make them like gay, but I'm just saying like, it's just, they're more feminine. They like to take care of themselves like a woman.
So let me just add a point to that, because that's a very beautiful insight. The Torah tells us, based on Hasidus, Jewish mysticism, that masculine men have some feminine energy, and feminine, based on Hasidus, have masculine energy.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and sometimes it might be more dominant in a man, his feminine energy, and in a woman, her masculine energy. At times it is like that. You know, I remember I was in preschool, and there used to be one father dropped off the kids. He would hug and kiss and lovingly, you know, bring the child in, and the mother would give a little push, go in. And you said, like, he was more of the nurturer. So there are people that have different dominance based on their spiritual makeup. It's true, yeah. So, and also, I didn't have time to go into it, but maybe at the very end, the two lights that God put into the universe, but it's quite complex, so I didn't choose that as one of the topics. So back to that is, so Adam and Chava are now separate. It's love at first sight, right? They see each other, oh, honey, wow, you're beautiful, come, let's get married. And the Torah says, Ezer Kenegdo. Ezer means a help, Kenegdo, against him. So the question is, how is a spouse a help against him or her? If you're a help, you're not against. And if you're against, you're not a help. So why does the Torah use the term Ezer Kenegdo? And the answer is, sometimes helping somebody is against them, against their opinion. A different viewpoint, a different perspective is helping your partner in life. Sometimes you see your partner making a mistake. So you say, honey, don't do it that way. Or darling, no. We're on a collision course. So Ezer Kenegdo is opposing opinions are sometimes precisely what a relationship needs. Like we mentioned before, you can't always have yes, 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 yay, 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 man or woman. Then what kind of relationship is it? Always doing what she wants, always doing what he wants. Where is the relationship here? It's one-sided, it's one-dimensional. Marriage, relationships have to be two-dimensional or even three-dimensional, which I'll explain in a minute. Which means Ezer Kenegdai, that yes, being against is a help sometimes. Another interesting tidbit here is, are you going to be an Ezer or are you going to be a Kenegdai? Are you going to be a partner in the relationship, or are you always going to be contrarian, argumentative, always looking to oppose? So the Torah is telling us, you could be an Ezer, you could be an asset in the relationship, or you be a Kenegdai. You could spend your whole life fighting your partner, fighting your soulmate. That's what it means. Ezer Kenegdai. This is immediately, God establishes the premises for a happy, loving relationship in the universe. And again, this could be applied with children, students, friends, parents, siblings, how you deal in your relationships. So what we're seeing here is 3 steps in life, in relationships. One is called step 1, or first stage in life is oneness. Before a person is born, there's one soul. The male and female soul is one. Then the soul is split, and they both come down onto the universe. A boy, a girl, different families, different countries, different places, different upbringings. And we start with oneness, then we have separation. And then when a person decides to get married, to seek out their soulmate, and they find their soulmate and they stand under the chuppah, the 3rd stage is unity. Reunited once again. So we have separation, we have oneness, they're one, then we have separation, and then we have unity.
Is that, Freida, is that where the Yiddish word Bereshith comes from?
Yes. And also soulmate, your soulmate.
Uh-huh.
Now it's interesting that it's called unity. Why? Because, it says you can't force a girl to marry a guy and a guy go marry a girl. In Jewish marriage, in Jewish life, in Jewish law, you cannot be forced to marry someone against your will. It's against Torah law. So you cannot force a guy, say, you must marry this girl, or a girl, you must marry this guy. Come, we're putting up a chuppah, we're marrying you off. Like in other cultures where they force marriages. In Jewish life, the girl has to say yes. Yes, I want to marry this guy. And likewise, the guy has to say yes to his perspective. Yes, I want to marry her. You cannot force a marriage. It's not considered a marriage then. So unity, true unity, is not coercion. True unity is you want it, you desire it, you want it. That's true unity. If you force someone, it's not unity. Unity can only be achieved for the person, the individual, the group, the team, wanting to be together with the other. So again, God is showing us the stages in life. We are one. A mother is pregnant with the child in her womb. It's one with her. What she eats, the child eats. And oxygen and so on, all from the mother. Then separation, the child is born. The child goes on its own way, college, work. And then if the child chooses to stay close to family, to parents, that's unity, by choice. Some children never leave home and they never come back because they've had experiences, or there's a disconnect or a problem. So in life, God is telling us about the 3 stages that happen in our lives. Unity. We reunited with our soulmate. We become one under the chuppah by choice. That's true unity. By choice. We want to be reunited. We want to be one. Not being forced. You know, sometimes you have a party and you try to make friends with the kids. You know that'll never happen. Why don't you go play with Joey? I don't like Joey. Why? He's your age. Go play with Joey. And the kid refuses to play with Joey. But if you just let it happen, they might run over and play together. But now the mother says, why don't you play with Joey? So unity comes through a person wanting it. So this is what the Torah tells us with Adam and Chava. So now we have the man, we have the woman, they're happily married. And God gives them a mitzvah. God says, you see the tree over there, the tree of knowledge? Don't eat from it. He tells Adam, God tells Adam. So Adam goes over to Chava and says, honey, I wanted to give you over something. God gave me a little message. You see the tree there? Don't ever touch it. And also don't eat from that tree. We're not permitted to eat or touch that tree. So Chava says, fine. She obviously goes for a stroll in the Garden of Eden, and a serpent, and at that time the serpents had hands and feet. They were not slithering on the ground, so maybe they were the dinosaurs. Think of a serpent on hands and feet. That's what I told my students at Hebrew school. Comes over and shows her the tree of knowledge and says, tree of knowledge, you want to try the fruit? She says, oh, no, we're not allowed to touch it, and we're not allowed to eat from it. It's a command from God. And the serpent pushes Chava against the tree, to her shock, and nothing happens. Serpent says, really? You're not allowed to touch the tree? Look, nothing happened to you. So she takes from the fruit, and she gives Adam from the fruit, and then it is the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge. And there's so many discussions on this. First of all, what fruit was it? Who could guess?
Apple?
That's the common misconception.
Fig.
Fig, very good. So I was reading, it was either a fig, it could have been wheat, it could have been an etrog, and one commentary even says it could have been a banana. Would you believe it? But it wasn't an apple. The apple was a misconception that many people wrote in popular literature, not in biblical literature, but in popular literature. And this is my own opinion, this is not an opinion of anywhere, is Michelangelo painted a famous painting of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden holding an apple. So I feel that many of the misconceptions is from that piece of art. But another person told me that in Latin, apple and tree have a similar Latin word. So when people wrote that she ate from the tree, they mistaked it for the word apple. She ate the apple. So that's another source maybe of the misconception that it was an apple. So they ate from the tree of knowledge. So I shared with you the story we tell all the students, but really, why did she eat from the tree of knowledge? She's so silly to think that, first of all, sometimes you eat something non-kosher, there isn't exactly a bolt of lightning hitting you on the head. There's free will. So even if she touched the tree and God told her not to, it doesn't necessarily mean that a bolt of lightning would have come down and punished her at that minute. So I don't think Chava was naive enough to think that because she touched a tree, which was permitted, by the way, and she wasn't punished immediately, like, so what? Doesn't mean you can go eat from the tree. So the literal story has a little bit of a hole in it. So why did she eat from the tree of knowledge? Any insights into this? And by the way, later on, when God gives the Torah, what does God tell Moses? Who remembers from our previous lessons? Teach it first to whom?
To women. To the women.
Why? Because of the sin of the apple, of the tree. Because God told Adam, don't eat from the tree. What did he tell Chava? Don't touch the tree and don't eat. He added his own little extra commandment. That's why the whole sin came about. Don't add. God said, don't eat from the tree. That's the rule. Don't start making new rules and regulations. So because he added and didn't give her the correct version, look what happened. So God says to Moses, I'm not taking any chances this time. Teach the women first, then we'll teach the fellows. So there's no misinterpretation here. So if anybody tells you Torah is not for women, really, God taught the women first. So Chassidus explains this in very lengthy, but I'll try to sum it up. Chava knew she shouldn't eat from the tree of knowledge, but she thought to herself the following: I will conquer sin. I will conquer sin and eradicate it. I will in effect go against God's will, and I will sublimate sin in the universe by doing that. I will actualize sin, and then I will sublimate sin. She thought she could conquer the evil inclination by stepping right into the lion's den, so to speak. It's a little bit of a difficult concept to understand, and I'm struggling with it a little bit too, but I wanted to share it with you. In her mind, by taking from the fruit and sharing it with Adam, she was telling her husband, honey, we were told not to sin by eating from the tree. Let us do it so that we could conquer it for all generations, but it didn't happen. What actually happened is by going against the will of God, they actualized sin. Before, sin was a concept. It wasn't brought into fruition. Now that they actually committed a sin, sin means deviation from God's will, they brought it into the world.
So was it a test that God purposefully put it there to see what would happen?
Yes, and not only that, God says to them, had you waited till Shabbos, 4 more hours, you would have been able to eat from that tree. I gave you a test for 4 hours. 4 hours, don't eat from my tree. And they failed the test. And they're banished from the Garden of Eden. And then they looked down at themselves and they realized they weren't wearing any clothes. By actualizing sin, they actualized shame. Before, there was no shame in the world. There was nothing to be ashamed of because there was no negativity. No negativity was actualized. Now that there's shame in the world and sin, they look down, they go, hey, we're not wearing clothes. We're embarrassed of ourselves. Shame comes from knowing you did something not right. You're embarrassed. You know, the kid takes the cookie from the cookie jar and there's crumbs all over, and the mother says, did you take a cookie? And the kid says, no. And the mother goes, really? You have chocolate all around your mouth. Shame comes from doing something wrong. Now they were shamed and they realized they weren't wearing clothes. So they went and they took fig leaves. So an interesting tidbit is, why fig leaves? Because people, the other trees of the kingdom said, you're not taking our leaves. You ate the fig, go take from the fig leaves. And God says to Adam and Chava, and this is the quintessential question that God asks each and every one of us every day. So there is a voice that says, Ayeka, where are you? Now, God didn't know Adam and Chava. God didn't know where they are. God knows where everybody is. So the commentaries jump in and say, Rashi says, Ayeka, it's not that God didn't know their physical location. God is saying, where are you? Look at what you did. Where are you in your life? Evaluate yourself. Look what you did. Do some introspection. Ayeka, where are you? Where are you heading now? That's what God asks them. And that's what God asks us every day. If we're sensitive, we can hear God's voice asking us every day, Ayeka, where are you? Are you doing everything you can in your life to be who you are, to actualize your potential, to tap into your energy that I gave you and your talents? Ayeka, where are you? And where have you been? Have you been doing everything that you should be doing? Or have you not done what you should be doing? Or have you done something you shouldn't be doing? So every day God asks us the same question that God asked Adam and Chava that very day. Ayeka, where are we? And then a very, very terrible tragedy happens. And we're going to end off with this. And the tragedy is they have two children. They have more children, but two children to start. The famous children, Cain and Abel, right? Cain and Hevel. Cain is the older, Hevel is the younger. Hevel was the farmer, agriculture. Cain was the shepherd. He dealt with the livestock. And they understood, you bring an offering to God. God provides, you bring an offering. So Hevel takes his most beautiful fruit and offers it up to God. And Cain says, why should I waste my best animals on God? God is going to burn it anyway. Let me bring something that's not so perfect. And he brings a cow or cattle that's a little bit damaged, has an imperfection. The fire comes down from heaven and accepts Hevel's fruit, Abel's fruit. But there's no fire that comes down from heaven and takes Cain's animal, because Cain's animal has an imperfection. And you're bringing a gift to God, an offering to God, you bring the best. So now Cain is upset and angry at Hevel, jealous of his brother, and he kills his brother. The first murder, the first crime, except for the apple eating, committed in the first millennium. And it's terrible, terrible tragedy. And the Torah describes Adam and Chava don't know what to do. They don't know what to do now. So the commentaries ask the question, what do you mean they didn't know what to do? They didn't know you take the body of your child and you bury him. God told you, you came from earth and you return to earth. We bury. So Chassidus says it's not that they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to do it, how to move forward. One child is a murderer, one child is dead. How do you move on in your life after such a tragedy? How do you get up the next morning and eat breakfast when such a thing happens in your life? When such a terrible, terrible tragedy, crime is committed in your own home? What do? They didn't know what to do. They were paralyzed until they see a raven burying a bird, digging a hole with its beak and burying a bird. And then the Kabbalah says, Chassidus says, they knew what to do. The question is what? What did the raven burying another bird teach them? Why? What is this whole, it's like a cryptic story. The answer is, in a nutshell, is that a raven is a very cruel animal. You know, Edgar Allan Poe, the raven, nevermore. Whenever there's a witch, there's a raven on the shoulder. Raven is known that when it gives birth, it does not feed or take care of its young. Go try to go near a cub of a bear. The bear will attack you. The bear will not allow you to touch its cub. The bear will take care of its cub. The law of the world, hi Margaret, the law of the world is that animals protect their young, but not the raven. The raven is a cruel animal. So the fact that the raven buried another bird gave Adam and Chava a perspective on how to deal with tragedy and loss and pain and destruction. And it's called Chesed Shalemes. Chesed Shalemes is somebody dies and there's no one alive to bury them. They don't have relatives, they don't have friends, or someone doesn't have money. So the Chesed Shalemes society, now they even have a society, goes, collects funds and buries the person. And it's called Chesed Shalemes is because you don't get any monetary reward. No one is paying you to do it. There's not going to be, no one is going to reciprocate. The raven burying the bird, that bird cannot come back later and bury the raven. The raven did it simply because of kindness to another bird, for no reason. Symbolic of that. So what God was telling Adam and Chava and all of us is that in life, there will be, God forbid, destruction. There will be Holocaust. There will be pain. There will be suffering. And we're going to ask ourselves, how can I recover from this? How can I get up in the morning and even drink a coffee, put on makeup, walk outside and smile when I suffered such a destruction in my life? Like every Holocaust survivor, every person who went through destruction, abuse, illness, pain. And God says, this is the way. Go out and bring love, light, joy, happiness to the world for no reason other than the fact that I tell you to do that, and it will transform you. It will bring you back to where you have to be. So when Adam and Chava sat there and saw that the only way to move on in life and have more children and build the world is by getting up and living their lives, filling the world with love, with kindness, with joy, with generosity, with peace, even though they suffered a terrible, terrible tragedy and destruction, it's the only way to move forward. Doing something only because it's good, not because you're getting anything out of it, not because the person deserves it, not because the world deserves it at times, but pulling yourself up and going out and bringing light into the world, love into the world, peace into the world, kindness, generosity, even though you have suffered tremendously. This is the story of Adam and Chava. And these stories are in the Torah to teach us our life's lessons, how to deal with some of the deepest pains, suffering, anything that happens in our life's challenges. And hopefully not. Hopefully our greatest challenge is our kids left the lunch on the table and we have to go chase down the bus. Hopefully that should be our biggest challenge. But the Torah is here to teach us that there's a real world. Adam and Chava, the first man and woman, the one child killed, murdered his brother for jealousy. Instead of saying to himself, you know what, I'm going to bring a better gift next time to God, he kills his brother. He gives in to his evil inclination. So it's a real world. The Torah could have covered up the story and not written the story. Why make people look bad? But the Torah is our life's lessons, our life's insights. Ayeka, where are you? And I want to close with this point, and then if anybody wants to add anything, is we look at the Torah, we look at the mitzvahs, and we're taught, and based on Jewish philosophy, how do you survive life? How do you cope with life? Have faith in God. It's called emunah, faith in God. It's all for the good, you say to yourself. God meant this to happen to me. I have to have faith. But now, based on this Torah portion, I want to turn it around on all of us. How do we look at life? Not only how we have faith in God, do you know, even more powerful, The Torah portion teaches us that God has faith in us. Bereshith is teaching us it's not only we have to have faith in God. God tells each and every one of us, I have faith in you. I created you is proof that I have faith in you. So every time you think to yourself when you fall down or you suffer a challenge, I have faith, God, I have to have faith in God. No, change it around. Say, you know, God has faith in me, that I can get up and live a life and contribute goodness, peace, and love to this universe and light. And go from oneness, separation, to unity. So it all ties in, it's one big circle. Bereshith. I hope I
Yep.
did it a little justice to this class. So does anybody want to add anything or?
Gorgeous, Freida. Thank you.
Thank
It was
you.
really
Beautiful.
stunning. Thank you.
Thank you, Freida.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you.
special.
My
Thank
pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. Next week, Noah, the flood.
Noah.
Yeah.
Shalom.
Yes, ah. Yeah, right.
What?
I said yes, ah.
Yes,
Yeah, right. Take care.
Yeah, have a wonderful week. Margaret, how's Vermont?
Bye,
Beautiful.
Freida.
Bye, Carrie. Beautiful.
Today it's what? Oh, today it's supposed to go up to 70, but then I guess it's going to be really raining tomorrow in Connecticut, right?
I don't know. You know, I haven't watched the weather, but when are you coming home? I miss you.
Thank you. Tomorrow.
Oh,
Tomorrow evening.
okay.
Okay.
Yes.
But they say